A word to the wise. We are an explicit podcast tackling content with adult themes as well as entering spoiler territory if you aren't caught up with us. That point today would be through chapter 54 of Brandon Sanderson's The Well of Ascension, the second installment in the Mistborn trilogy.
Hey there, this is Cross.
And I'm PJ.
And we are Words and Whiskey, a podcast for veteran and novice readers alike. We tackle fiction novels and love to talk about what we're drinking. You should think of us as your intoxicating weekly book club.
What is going on today, Crossland? There's some weird energy about that's making me fuck up the clapping in and out of the episodes. Like our Devil's Cut just completely forgot to click the record button, which is one of my only jobs at the beginning of the episode. And right before we started actually talking, I was waiting for you to count us in, and that's my job. So I'm a little all over the place today, I think.
Yeah, I know. We were just sitting there. I was like, whatever. I didn't say it, but I implied it with my I was like, yeah, when you're good. Yeah, it's you're doing the intro, so you have to kind of sit.
Mm-hmm.
No, I feel that. I'm going to blame, for us collectively, my hangover from this weekend.
Yep, I'll take that.
You can blame my hangover for yourself.
And I do.
Excellent.
Fuck you, Crossland.
God, I drank so much. So with that, today is our 11th episode discussing The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. And we are going to chat about chapters 51 through 54. But before we do that, PJ, what are you drinking today?
So I initially set out to not drink during today's episode because I have my last final of school period tomorrow afternoon. So wanted to be good to go for studying for that later on. You know how it goes. So what I made was a seltzer, just LaCroix Pure with Bitterman's Hellfire Habanero Shrub. So I think for the amount of liquid that I put into this, I need a lot more of this Hellfire Shrub because I don't taste it at all. But it's refreshing because it's sparkling water. So there's that. But I'll probably be adding more drips of that. But I decided to follow that up with a beer, which is Mango, Strawberry, Pineapple, Coconut, Brains, Double Fruit Smoothie Sour from Drecker. So it's they have this Brains line, and every release it's a different combination of fruits. So this week, as I said, mango, pineapple, strawberry, coconut. But the ingredients list is mango, more mango, strawberry, more strawberry, pineapple, more pineapple, coconut, more coconut, sea salt, lactose, and vanilla bean. Honestly, so much fruit that the actual sour part gets completely lost in the mix. But still, I mean, it's like drinking juice. It's delicious.
Yeah, like a smoothie, like literally drinking a smoothie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome.
What about you, Crossland? What are you drinking?
So I didn't get the memo that you weren't planning on drinking, and I probably wouldn't have made a cocktail had you have said such a thing due to the aforementioned weekend hangover. However, I did instead make a cocktail because I am a monster and I treat the show very seriously. So I made a cocktail anyway because I am.
So it's all in the name of professionalism, is it?
It is all in the name of professionalism. Your reason is super valid, though. Don't worry about it. You shouldn't feel guilty whatsoever. Definitely don't feel guilty. So I am having a custom cocktail. It's it's adjacent to a lot of things. It's based on some ingredients that I had left over from this weekend as well. So what I'm going to call it is Clubs' Trust, kind of our final week here with Clubs. So I felt like it was important to dedicate a cocktail to him, as I really like him as a character throughout the story. And it was one of those that I just felt like I wanted to, honor with a cocktail. So what I have here is 1.5 ounces Plantation Run, 1 ounce of Campari, half an ounce of Orgeat, 2 ounces of pineapple juice, and 3/4 ounce lime juice. It is so tasty. This is so delicious.
What is the distinction between that and a Jungle Bird?
So Jungle Bird isn't going to have the Orgeat.
Okay.
And has a different ratio of Campari to rum.
Gotcha.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, I think it's 1.5 to 3/4 versus 1.5 to 1. It's got less pineapple juice in it, and yeah, uses a Demerara versus the Orgeot. I'm not gonna lie, it is very similar to a Jungle Bird. I knew that when I was like going into it, but it's also I just like the Orgeot as opposed to the Demerara. Simple. That almond flavor brings a lot to this. That I actually like this better than I like the Jungle Birds that I've made.
Yeah, I'd be willing to give that a shot because last time I had a Jungle Bird, I think I talked about this. I needed to pump it up with a lot more lime juice in order to make it like feel balanced in any sort of way. So I feel like Orgeot would help that along as well.
Yeah, it just rounds it out and makes it really smooth in a different way that I didn't expect. I also, for the record, was out of every other simple syrup and I didn't want to make any. So this is another like, this is what I have. And so I'm going to throw something together and kind of fuck around with the formula. So, it worked out. Yeah. I'm kind of incorrect there. I did have Demerara simple syrup in my fridge. I could have used Demerara. I chose not to. I could have made a Jungle Bird. I chose not to. And then following that up, I'm having a beer that I've had on the show previously, but not for probably since Dark Age, at the very least, maybe even Iron Gold. Double Candy from Sycamore. It's their double IPA. I've had a lot of their stuff on the show, but I don't think I've had Double Candy on the show since starting Mistborn.
Okay.
So
awesome. Exciting.
It's great. It's solid. It's really tasty. It's a 9%er brewed and canned in Charlotte. So, yeah, it's great. Good stuff. Okay, this week we're kind of back to our regular format, so we aren't going into PJ's predictions like we did last week to kind of clear up all of that absolute nonsense. Instead, we are going into our chapter breakdown here. So we start off with chapter 51. We open up the conversation this week with Vin contemplating all of the stimuli around her, the mist, the deepness, and whether she is mad or potentially the hero of ages. She's kind of at this crossroad in many different ways right now, and that mist spirit is sitting in the tent with her and Elend as she's able to feel and sense the outline of it in the room with them. What's on your mind with all these different events swirling and circling around our girl?
So, first of all, she's not in the tent when she's thinking about this. She's outside and like realizes it's
No, she's outside
in the tent, which is a terrifying prospect, first and foremost. But I really appreciated throughout this entire scene that it felt like her mind was just very meandering and sort of listing through her different like thoughts. And you can almost feel her focus just snap to that mist wraith as soon as, or not mist wraith, the mist spirit, as soon as it gets her attention, like it's just laser focus. And there's something about the way that it's narrated. I don't know what it is. It just feels like I get this a lot throughout this entire section of just kind of shifting in the way that a character is thinking to themselves as things are happening around them, being very distinct. And I'm not sure why, or if it's something new or not, or if it's old and I'm just picking up on it now, but it felt very easy to read. I don't know.
It grabs you, right? And I think it's because of that change. There's a change in pace and tension here that I think really kind of grabs you out of these moments, right? We meander a little bit and have this very kind of like thought experiment-y, and then we get grabbed by some like event in some moment, or we have like a character. I think another example of this happening a couple of times is with Breeze's sections throughout. Like whenever Breeze has a section, he's got a similar kind of meandery, and then reaction, and it's this really big
Sazed too. There's one with Sazed.
Yeah. So I definitely understand what you're sensing. And I think that's a part of that is why I think this book isn't quite as well liked, is because now we're ramping up, right? We spent a lot of time in this middle kind of tone for a lot of the book where it was like things are happening and there's a lot going on, but it's not quite as snappy, and this is snappy. So.
Okay. I think we might have talked about this before. I don't get that feeling. And I think it's just because of the format, how we approach this book. I don't get the sort of slog that people.
Yeah, I think that is partially format in the sense that you can only read so much, and so you're only given so much.
There are always things happening in those sections, so there's always something to talk about.
Yeah, I always bookend it, which is another reason that I think that people, it's super easy to become a really quick reader who like goes through and wants like the next big thing, and to kind of lose the forest for the trees in reading, in enjoying a novel, which is actually this is just a semi side tangent. This is why I'm going through Rhythm of War more slowly, is because I want to enjoy it. It's the last of the Stormlight Archive books that's published, so I'm just taking my time. I raced, quote. It still took me 2 months to read those 3 books, but like raced through them comparatively. I just decided to slow it down to enjoy this last one for sure. So
Nice.
For exactly this reason. So feel ya. Shortly thereafter, we get a really warm moment and kind of a profound comment about how Vin is feeling right now. To quote here, Vin nodded, but he probably couldn't see her. She knelt, looking at him as the sun rose behind her. She'd given herself to him, not just her body and not just her heart. She'd abandoned her rationalizations, given away her reservations, all for him. She could no longer afford to think that she wasn't worthy of him, no longer give herself the false comfort of believing they couldn't ever be together. She'd never trusted anyone this much. Not Kelsier, not Sazed, not Reed. Elend had everything. That knowledge made her tremble inside. If she lost him, she would lose herself.
So I believe that this has been true for a long time. Maybe even since the point where she expressed her love of Ellen to Kelsier back in the previous book. It's this relationship is something different than anything else that she's had, any friendships, anything that we've seen so far. And she's been personally wrestling with the identity of her, like her own personal identity. And I don't know, this bond has been there through the entire thing. And I think that if anything were to threaten it, she would have sort of snapped to this realization earlier. But it's good to see this really come into her forethought and like realize for herself that she cares this much and is this invested in this relationship. But I don't think it's technically a change in the relationship, you know?
Yeah. No, I don't. I think it's not. I agree with you. I think it's not a change in the relationship. I just think it's a profound realization. It's a deeper understanding of what that relationship means to her and how important it is. And I think that's been kind of what the whole Zane storyline was kind of playing at, right? Is like surface level relationship and ideas of, you know, being invested in someone else versus something that actually means something to you. And that's kind of the, you know, it's not really love triangle-y, but it is kind of what like love triangles get at in storytelling, like the trope of them, is the meaning of a good relationship versus one that is not, you know, not a good relationship for you necessarily. Great person, but not one. Well, not in Zane's case, but a lot of the time with the trope, you know, it's kind of the idea. So, yeah, I totally agree with you, though. I think that there were the seeds of this all the way back with Kelsier. I think that that's a great call, and I think we've only seen that deepen since the beginning of this book. So,
true.
Yeah, it's great. I just like that paragraph is one of my favorites from this section for sure. Probably from this part even. I just really enjoy it front to back. So Spook makes an important oh my God. Spook makes observation. Yeah. Spook makes an important observation about Vin's change and also getting pretty vulnerable with us regarding his name and how he wishes he was kind of powerful like Vin and how he feels weak and powerless. I think that this is kind of an excellent moment because it highlights very differently how Spook has been affected by his upbringing. Similarly, we know that he was a child with a background closer to Vin's than anyone else's in the crew. But unlike Vin, he wasn't liberated by his powers in the same way and feels powerless in this age of Mistborn's heroes and all the changes that are kind of around in the country. I just think that this is another point in which this character becomes so well written and grounded in a fantastic way.
I can certainly see where he's coming from, or like the idea of being kind of useless. It makes me wonder what he would have felt like if he was completely mundane. Like if everything else was the same, he was still part of the crew, he was still like involved in all of this, but he didn't have, like he wasn't a Tenai. I strangely think he'd have more self-confidence and like more of a sense of belonging and purpose within everything. And compared to where he is now, he has a power, but as has been pointed out, it's useful but redundant ultimately. And I don't know, what does he actually bring to the table other than just kind of redundancy? So there's that. And I think this is also a good point to bring up what we had kind of glanced over last week, because I guess I can only speak for myself. I had completely like forgotten how young he actually is.
It had fallen out of the back of my brain
Yeah.
because I was thinking about Hero of Ages and
Okay.
like that. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's like 16, right? He's a kid
Mhm.
still. And I think I mostly like, I remember that he's about Vin's age. He's a couple years younger, but they're all going through something pretty crazy and they have so much responsibility on them. Like they're central to a budding kingdom, which is not something that most kids go through. So I had in my head that Vin was like she already progressed to like mid 20s maybe. So I thought Spook was kind of around there too, but she's only like 18, 19 years old. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it really makes things feel different, you know, when thinking about Spook and what he's going through and how he's feeling.
Yeah, I definitely agree on the side of Spook because there's so much emotional maturity between, even Vin and Spook, right? Because they are these, ska outcasts and everything else that's been going on with them in the background. So really kind of come to appreciate them in that way a little bit more. I did want to mention, because you brought it up, the idea of sort of if he didn't have a power, how would he feel? And I think he'd feel pretty similar to how Doxson does, right? Like, or he would be trying to find. I agree with you. I totally agree with you. I think that he would be trying to find his place in a different way, in a grounded way, in something that he feels like he can actually contribute to. He does have that sense. He personally, obviously, feels that sense of redundancy versus Vin. And I think that's also why the relationship between that is kind of not relationship, but rather friendship between Elend and Spook is foundationally great because Elend doesn't have anything and like feels, but he is like a king, but it's like, well, I made myself a king. Like I had to study and I had to do these things. And, it's almost like Spook has sort of the naivete of, a 16-year-old wanting to find themselves. Of course, at 16, you feel, those kind of, yeah, I don't know, those feelings.
Yeah. But there is something to be pointed out even in that explanation of Ellen becoming king. The only reason he had the opportunity to like study as much as he did and to be poised to take up that mantle is because of the very completely unfair upbringing that he had as opposed to Spook.
Totally true. Definitely an oversight. But I meant more in sort of the, that's a fair point though. That is definitely an inequality between the two. So inequity. And I think regarding Spook, I think it's great that we get a little bit more on him later and like how he breaks. So I guess we'll talk about that then, because I think that it again shows an important facet of his character that we'll talk about then. We cut back, though, to the crew and begin to witness the attack of the Colossus on Luthadel. Our prolonged siege is finally over, and the fight against the Colossus has just begun. I really appreciate, as the battle begins, Sazed's commentary on what they get. And so they said, this is what we get, being ruled over by a god for 1,000 years, 1,000 years of peace. Tyrannical peace, but peace nonetheless. We don't have generals. We have men who know how to order a bath drawn. We don't have tacticians, we have bureaucrats. We don't have warriors, we have boys with sticks. And man, from there, the fighting really starts, and it is brutal.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up this quote because, like, you brought up the quote before, but this one is my favorite of the section. And it's one thing to think about how, like, thinking about that quote and sort of the position they're in, it's one thing to approach it when they're under threat. The city is being surrounded by these armies, and it's this overwhelming sense of unpreparedness. But to get that quote now, when the warriors are like the warriors, which are just giant humanoid beasts that are perfectly equipped, both physically and mentally, to just slaughter everybody that's trying to defend the city, it makes this hit so much more like directly in my chest of like, holy shit, everything's gonna topple. Like we just didn't, it's been a millennia of not being prepared for something like this.
Yeah. I think if there's one small critique on the Colossus in general, it's that we didn't see something like this sooner. Like we saw remnants of it, you know what I mean? But we weren't really exposed to the violence, and so we knew that it was going to be bad, but we didn't know how bad. It does make it hit more in this moment that it's like, oh, this is really fucking awful. But yeah, you're totally right, and it is literally a millennia of unpreparedness.
Do you think part of that, like, I could see this going either way if this was a decision? Like, say this is a decision that Branderson made of, do I include a foreboding scene? Not foreboding.
Earlier scene.
I don't know. An earlier scene, I guess that's a
tease. It's a tease, right?
Of like for the reader to understand what these Koloss can do. Or is it better to try to put the reader in the shoes of the people of Luthadel who probably don't actually know what they're up against to a certain extent? And I guess as readers, we're kind of left somewhere in the middle because we have basically Sazed's knowledge of them, and we have Ellen's like firsthand account of going through. But so that's more than the city folk, but less than like being fully exposed. So, I don't know.
I feel like thinking about this, and we can't change the book, so I'm not going to focus on trying to fix the book, right? But an adaptation is a place where you can fix kind of spots like this. In my head, what you would do is you'd have Sazed on his way back from Luthadel travel through a city that was ravaged by the Koloss and do like him imagining the interspersed cuts of violence. So like you would see him looking at at a house that was burned out and see that moment where, Koloss were cutting people down in front and where the bodies are strewn out and stuff like that. Like that's what I think you would do to give you that tension, because we didn't really know the threat that these things posed outside of an individual level,
Right.
And even then, like, not really.
Yeah.
So again, yeah, small thing. I don't know what makes more sense in the book. This book is already long for time, according to Brandon. It was already one of those books where it's like, I promised a 600-page book and I delivered a 740-page book. So yeah. So I don't know. I can't blame him. He probably did have an earlier cut that was longer, and that included that. It's kind of most authors cut about 20%. Like you cut 20% out in edits of your story in the attempt to streamline things because you're probably being dumb and too slow and you don't realize it until you're done.
That's fair.
So yeah, I've cut somewhere in the realm of 30% out of that one book. So dumb and too slow is a very real feeling. But yeah, so in adaptation, I feel like that's the change that I would make, because I think those flashes would work great as a source of tension. We of course, we leave that and we cut back to Elend. Again, this week's material, I think more than any other one, lends itself directly to adaptation because it does literally feel like camera cuts between scenes and moments in a very clean way. We cut back to Elend and Vin and find the men that have been following them weren't Straff's scouts, but in fact a couple of soldiers and Elend's friend Jostes. Jostes quickly explains that he was forced to abandon his Koloss army outside of Luthadel due to a supply cart fire that burned all of his coins for the Koloss. This angers Elend, and he decapitates his old drinking buddy. This is a weird moment for me as a reader, and I don't know how to perfectly think about it thematically. So I'm curious as to what your thoughts are.
So my thoughts, I've got a few different thoughts. First of all, as far as the decision that Jostes takes to basically abandon everything and just kind of let the Koloss go, because whatever. Makes him a bastard garbage human. Like, just a garbage person.
I think he was dead either way, But it is bad. It's worse.
That's not the point.
Right. The fact that he was doing in the first place was the problem.
Exactly. So he knew from the jump that he was precariously positioned as the leader of this army, and he put himself in this shit show. He really, really did. And he, at his core, based on our conversations with between Sazed and Jostes, we knew that he knew that too. He was trying to put on a face and pretend like he wasn't. But yeah, he knew that he was really kind of on the razor's edge here. So figuring that he can just kind of wash his hands of it and not take any responsibility for abandoning the army that he's very tenuously holding on to is the same as just letting them go attack and giving that order, because ultimately, operatively, there's no difference. So that brings me to my thoughts on Elend. And I think that this is a very meaningful confirmation that Elend has kind of gone through a transformation into this capable leader and king. Able, like, his comments prove that he's able to forgive, like, very compassionately on a personal level, but won't let that persuade his decisions that have to be made on a diplomatic level and following through with the needs of his people. So, and I think it's very fair to say his people would need justice in this moment, because for all he knows, Luthadel's gone based on this like single abandonment action.
Yeah, yeah. And I agree with all of that wholeheartedly. Like I think that you're entirely correct. And you know, it's one thing for this philosophical drinking buddy to have a conversation about potentially doing something like this. It is entirely another thing to go through with doing something like this, and to have gone through this thought experiment of like, well, what if we, like, I'm controlling the Colossus with money, as opposed to like just positing it and like having that conversation, which is what he previously really was with Elend. You know, more of a, they were friends for sure, but like it was more conceptual. In the moment that they crossed that line, you know, it's a different game based on the risk and the judgment, which is why I ultimately understand exactly why Elend makes this decision and does the right thing, and even the soldiers agree because they understand. But I do think it's a little bit at odds with and this is good. This is good. I mean this with all, like, I don't mean this is a bad thing. It's a little bit at odds with where he started, right? And this shows that growth trajectory that he's been on over the course of the story, to not being the straight up moral paladin, like bad people still deserve consequences, but it is a little Judge Dredd of him. You know what I mean? Like it is a little of one mind, not like a, yeah. I don't know. I just have that like one small thing. It's again, it's just like a character thing. Like,
no, I think I can agree with you on that. And I guess that brings up a question for me to you. Do you think he actually forgave him on a personal level? Like he says
I think so.
Does?
I think so.
Okay.
I think he meant it. I think he was sincere about it. It just gets me back to that. We asked this question back when he first stabbed Jostes before, right? Of like, where the fuck did that come from? And it gets back to that same question of like, what's going on with Elend a little bit? You know, like he's clearly still juggling some command friendship barriers that he needs to figure out, which is also like his identity with like titling friends and like having them call him Lord or King back when he was, before he was deposed. And there's still a lot of identity questions, I think, at this point. But I think that this is kind of sealing in that identity to some degree that he associates with, I don't want to say king, because he's not a king, but like his sort of authority? I don't know. That's the tough part, is without the authority, what are you? You're a vigilante.
Yeah.
Right now he is.
But he's also outside of, like, is there a governing body right here anyway?
I mean, I think he's still in the central dominance or the north dominance, so there is technically, but like, and no one's going to hold this accountable. No one but us would ask this question, right? But I do think it's kind of a little bit of vigilantism, if we think about it for too long.
I mean, yeah, if you really think about it, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I don't disagree with it though.
No. Again, I don't either.
Yeah.
So I don't think that any of this is bad. It's just an interesting thing to ponder. We got some reactions. I actually thought that this happened in Hero of Ages. I didn't think it happened right now. I remembered the scene entirely differently. And I got a post in the No PJ Sun this week about decapitating Jostes, and I was like, I thought that was in the beginning of the Hero of Ages. Oh. Like, nope. For some reason, it was just locked in my brain. That's not really a spoiler, but yeah. Yeah. I like it. But to kind of cap that point, Elend drives home something that we've been saying for many weeks and talking about in our own right, how both Elend and Vin are tools, knives of their own, not for each other, but for the kingdom. And I think that this is that stake of identity and everything else that's been driven home since the beginning, talking about these two, I think, really being the heirs of the survivor. It says heir, but it's heirs entirely.
Yeah, so I might be completely wrong on this.
Sure.
But I really like this commentary in general, but I'm curious where this came from Elend's perspective and in his point of view. Because that wording specifically is something that Vin has been wrestling with. And as far as I could tell, she hadn't like talked to Elend about feeling like the knife. You know? So maybe I'm just reading into it too much, but that felt like Vin's struggle and Vin's wrestle, as opposed to Elend's. So it felt weird to have him be the one to bring that up externally from a conversation with Vin. Ultimately, it really doesn't matter. The point still remains, but it just kind of tripped me up that was the language that he used.
Yeah, it is. I was just double checking inside of the text because that's kind of the wonder of using Kindle now to do this kind of searching, because I found holistically that not all sources are entirely true. So now I'm doing my own shit manually, folks at home. So yeah, I think that it is fascinating because this is an internal conversation that Ellen has had, or rather not Ellen, that Vin has had with Zane, and it's been in her head. And so I think it speaks to the fact that Ellen was seeing Vin's pain for so long and like understanding how she felt about like having to be the assassin and the warrior and the defender, and interpreting that just using the same language. And I feel like that is a thematic thing more than it is it's maybe the most unreal moment. Like it's maybe the most like written for TV moment, if that makes sense, where it's like, oh yes, this is kind of tropey to refer to it in the same way that someone else did without saying it. But at the same time, I think Ellen has enough like emotional intelligence to end at this point, to like come to this point. He is a philosopher dude after all, you know.
And it's entirely possible that they had conversations on the road.
Yeah,
the last
that
couple
doesn't
days.
feel great about it though.
It
you
doesn't.
know, like that doesn't.
It doesn't feel good as a justification, but I like yours better.
It's possible. Yeah,
that it's intuition and picking up on the Vin's philosophy.
Well, because he was so good. If you rereading this book, I was keying into this. He was very good at reading Vin's emotions, but Vin was terrible at reading his emotions. Right, for the most part. There's some exceptions there. Yeah, where he was also bad too. So like, we can't holistically give him, you know, a full credit there. But at the very least, we can say, you know, I think he's more intuitive emotionally and emotionally intelligent than Vin was to start. It's a lot more to question, and it always has. So he's came from a sense of security, and she's come from insecurity her entire life. So our final conversation of this chapter is one that I'd hinted at a little bit earlier. It's the conversation surrounding Sazed's lie, that the Koloss would take the city, as we definitely know to be happening, and Vin also comes to realize that the well isn't north, and that their quest was intended to be fruitless, as Spook that Clubs had told him. So this is kind of a fascinating moment to end the chapter on. And yeah, what do you think?
I guess I have a gripe with it. I don't know why. Because she then, like, within this, like, obviously she knows that the lie is happening, or that she was lied to. But then she really pays attention and feels the beating from Luthadel and to the south. She's like, oh man, it's been there the whole time. But I feel like we had explicit, like, passages saying that she was following the beating northwards.
I think that she thought that it was getting stronger. And for the record, just to kind of clarify some thoughts. So here's why I also think that this chapter is brilliantly written, is because as we head away from the beat, Vin starts getting better and like mentally healthier, and like a lot of things improve for her as she goes away from the sound of the beating in the background. If you look at that over like the last week or so, okay. And as she, like, I noticed that this time, that's when she starts to actually have meandering thoughts again, and like takes time to ponder a lot of things, as opposed to being rushed between thing to thing to thing and feel like it's just pressure and stress building up. So I think that that's why it falls into her rear view, so to speak. Like she like forgets about it. And it's prophesied, and like Ellen says, there's no reason that it shouldn't be in the Terrace Mountains. All the religious texts say this. Everything everywhere says this. You know, everything that they have on it says that it's there. So it feels right. And she's like finally being able to sleep again soundly, and like all these other signs that say that you're going in the wrong direction, actually. She does not hear it in the other direction, per your point. She just feels like it's there.
Gotcha.
And then she stops paying attention to it because it gets lighter.
I just, for whatever reason, I felt like there was a comment that said she's following it north, and maybe that's just the wording, and I read too much into the word following.
Yeah, I think she wasn't following the beating so much as she was following the idea of where the beating came from, if that makes sense.
Okay. Gotcha.
Like where she assumed, like they all assumed it was there.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Good to pick up on that sort of mental health, physical health of Vin improving as she gets.
Yeah. I think that was a really big one on this read because I don't think I caught that the first time, and I was like, wow, this is such a small thing, but it really changes as she leaves in a good way. And you can kind of see as she gets back, she gets more stressed, but that stress can also be attributed to the fact that her friends are in danger. So it's kind of I'm of two minds on that as she heads back.
Actively dying.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. there is.
I mean, there's that.
For sure.
I just want to find this. Sorry. Does it start with Vin's perspective?
Where?
Yeah.
In the chapter, you mean?
Starts with 51 starts with Vin's perspective is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, here it is.
She literally says the opposite.
Yeah, she literally says the opposite. But it's not directional, which is weird. Just in her head. Okay. Yeah, she literally says, shouldn't the thumping be getting louder, not softer? I don't know why I just completely flipped that in my head or ignored that.
I don't think it was because of this week's reading. I think it was because of last week's when they're heading out of the city, because that's kind of the indication is that it's like, okay, to follow the thumping, but it's not really following because she doesn't understand the directionality of it yet. So okay. I think that's why, because there's an assumption on the mapping there more than anything else.
Okay.
I super get where you're coming from because I think that is the intentional mislead, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Cool. Glad we ironed that out a little bit.
Yeah, no worries. Me too. With that, we move into chapter 52, our second chapter of the week. We have our logbook here to start. My pleas, my teachings, my objections, and even my treasons were all ineffectual. Alendi has other counselors now, ones who tell him what he wants to hear.
This one's weird to me.
It's near the end here, man. I know we aren't near the end of the week yet with logbooks, and maybe we can talk about this in culmination here. But we are so near the end of the book. I'm kind of curious where your head's at with the logbooks.
I don't know if it's two different people, but it still feels like two separate texts.
Sure.
That we're reading. I could believe that it's two separate people entirely because we get simultaneously information about Quan sort of creating this subversion with Rashik on one side of things. And on this, it's straight up treason for the sake of trying to get Alendi to stop. So maybe it's different parts of, I don't know. This feels like somebody on the outside of that plan seeing Rashik and the other terracemen with Alendi going forward and trying to put a stop to it. Here, all the while Quan is the one that set it up to go there. Mm-hmm. So that's my assumption, is that it's two separate texts by two separate authors, and they're all just kind of jumbled together.
Okay. And I mean, that is an interesting thought and one we're still kind of waiting for an answer on. And again, I don't think that this is necessarily a full-on prediction or anything. It's just we're almost at the end of the book, and there's still so many questions around what exactly Quan's getting at.
Right.
Yeah. I really think as we get into this chapter now, Breeze is the highlight of this week for me in a bunch of different ways. I think that he is the most intentionally grounded and well-written character as we move through this bit. And it makes me very glad when we get to this section that we've gotten Breeze's perspective here, because we can kind of get a normal feel for how he is and really the impacts that this combat is having on him. But I think that his perspective is just so strong and strongly written that I really enjoyed immensely. We join him soothing away the fears and anxieties of the troops around him at Zinc Gate. We share a quick moment here with Clubs as well, speaking about his time as a warrior in the South under the Lord Ruler and how they often won their conflicts because of the Koloss. I want to make mention of this because I think it feeds back into the bit that we were talking about last week with this man being a craftsman. Now we kind of have this fuller picture that he left his sort of warrior profession to become a craftsman. It's like that coming home from war and being well revered. And you can kind of get an understanding of how he got to the station that he did because of the war experience, and also why he prefers that and why he wanted to be that life and why he is this jaded kind of man and character. I don't know. And that he can't escape it. I just love Clubs' arc so much. And, it's unfortunate, of course, that ends this week, but I think that it is. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah. I think you covered kind of my feelings on that pretty well just in going through that, but kind of on a higher level, I think Clubs and Breeze, both independently and together, have such strong presences and personalities in this section of the book. I feel like without saying the character names, we could tell. It's so distinct that we'd be able to tell whose perspective we're in just from the sort of personality being portrayed. And I feel like this would make an amazing perspective shift in any sort of adaptation. Just going to Breeze specifically, because that's what we get in the book, but dealing with these two is so distinct and unique, and it would make a very easy transition from a different character's point of view, much in the way that like Game of Thrones has very distinct, separate personalities in every single one of the perspectives that they follow. This lends itself to it perfectly.
This is like a C plot that plays like a B plot. You know what I mean? Like, typically you've got your ABC plot, right? So our B plot is really Sazed. Our A plot is Ellen Vin. So yeah, this is like a perfect C plot that really plays as strong as a B plot does. So yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah. It would definitely work as a fantastic cut around inside of an adaptation. And it's a great portrayal because it feels like more, even though, you know, we still have two Allomancer mistings here, it does feel like they have like they're limited, and so it gives a varied perspective because they, you know, only have their one. It's not quite every man, but it's as close as we can kind of get for the most part. So cool. Then, of course, after the last chapter in the Betrayal by Spook and the Coward commentary, I can't believe, did we not talk about that? I just want to briefly mention Spook being so down on himself there is kind of painful to read, but at the same, he's not really a coward. He was just doing what he was told. He's a 16-year-old, you know, like, I feel bad for him.
I don't think I blame him in the slightest. And I don't think Vin does either.
No, I just mean his internalized blame. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's what I think is wrong. I think ultimately, what was he gonna, like, again, 16-year-old? You have to give him a pass. Getting back to this chapter, though, the reason that brought up into my mind, Vin is Peter dragging her way across the countryside, and I'm just struck by the emotionality she feels for her friends that she knows are going to die. She was under the impression that she was traveling north to save her friends with whatever power she could find at the well. And man, this is just a tough spot for her to be in. Her, like, crying and everything else was just a gut punch.
She is just racked with stress. She's frantic. She's exhausted. But she never stops being so, like, laser focused and driven. It makes for a really, really fun read throughout the entire thing. And ultimately, like, there's not action happening here. It's just her running. And it's still exciting to read.
Yeah, the pace is somehow still electric. And you're just like, because it's frantic, like you're saying. Like it's got that energy about it. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that as well. And so we get that Peter drag, which is fun. And I just want to mention this very briefly. There's that brief conversation. So again, this part is structured like a movie or a TV show in the way that it kind of like cuts back and forth, right? So we jump again to Clubs and Breeze for like 2 pages or something like that. And, you know, it's a cut back to how did we get here? And there's just that nice little joke that we get from Clubs, which ends up being, you know, kind of our last dash of humor that we get from him. Is guess we're just idiots. And then they're talking about Kelsier, and it's like he turned us into idiots who would stand at the front of a doomed army. And Club says, that bastard. And you know, it's a great moment to go out on right when the gates break. It feels like Helm's Deep has just erupted, and we had our last bit of humor before the world ends.
Yeah, that felt good.
Yeah, it's just a small thing, but it's, you know, it's just it's a good send-off at the very least. And we've spent a lot of time with Clubs over the last week. And, you know, obviously I didn't make a big deal out of it because I knew that he was going to die. But, like, yeah. Yep. So we cut to Sazed, who really doesn't believe that he's got the makeup to be leading the gate under a siege and that he can't really do it himself, and is seeking new leadership in the place of the commander / just nobleman who was assigned to his gate. You know, Beads is in charge of the soldiers, and however, he then goes and leaves to deal with a very different problem, that of the civilians that have gathered to be saved by the Lady Heir. This is fascinating for 36 reasons to me, one of which is like Sazed pushing back against someone else's faith. What'd you think about the situation at the gate?
That's that last point you made. The idea that he's pushing against someone else's faith is such a strange but profound point, I think. And there are a couple ways that I view that. One, I think we talked about last week that Sazed has already kind of begun an internal spiral and existential crisis regarding his religions. And another is that this religion is new entirely, and he hasn't actually studied it. So, well, he hasn't studied it because there's not really anything to study.
Yeah.
So maybe it doesn't hold the same level of legitimacy in his own mind. And I think 3, as another option, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, is sort of how this could be entirely tied to the prophecy and the terrorist religion that would point towards Vin being the hero of ages and Sazed being the announcer, and him kind of pushing against that idea and anything pointing to that. So that's my take on it, is that this is more tied to the terrorist prophecies than it is to a unique and new religion. Whether or not the members of this religion know it or not, I think this is the same thing popping up again. And Sazed is fighting against it because it's revolving around him.
And I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that is a good. The third one is a great, and the other two also make sense as like rationales. There's a number of things that I think are rolling around the scene in a bunch of different contexts, and I think that is your third rationale. There is the one that I generally think of the most, is that closeness to the terrorist faith. The other thing that I would add on or tag into that is this idea that, like, and this isn't necessarily new to the world of Scadrial entirely, because the Lord Ruler was alive and was like a living god to some degree. And so these people are used to worshiping a living god and are okay with that. But in all of these other faiths that Sazed has, there's not, like, none of those gods are like corporeal in the same kind of way, you know? And so it's a very different ball game. And he's like, she's just my friend. I like tell her how to live her life sometimes. Like, and that just doesn't feel that, like, it's hard for him to, like, even buy into that idea, because they have faith in something that he talks to, but then that feeds back into the terrorist faith idea. And, like, this idea of being the announcer and the sort of person that leads to, you know, the hero of ages.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think, oh man, I was going to bring something else up. Oh, I think one thing to make note of regarding the Lord Ruler and being a living god, that was kind of illusion. Like, he was the cornerstone of this religion that he built himself based on powers that he and nobody else possessed, not because he was actually, like, divine, but because he was unique, you know? And he was able to kind of trick everybody into thinking that he was divine.
Right. Yeah. That's a fair point as well. I guess I was trying to get to the point of, like, the idea that there was a living quote god, you know, at the point.
True.
So faith was easier because it was real and corporeal, you know, in that way. Yeah. Yeah. This is a tough thing to parse here as to why, like, Sazed is feeling this way, and, like, how even to deal with a real representation of, like, your god and saving you. We're going to get into this later when Vin actually shows up, because that's when, like, this really kind of comes to a head, I think. But we've laid the groundwork here to have that conversation. So, of course, before we can complete the argument that's happening there between the people, a Koloss makes its way up and over the wall, throwing beads over its shoulder like a child done with playing with a toy. And then the fighting really begins.
Fuck.
Yeah.
What just an intense way to start a fight. Just getting ripped into combat. I don't know, man. I'd rather wade into the shallow end a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, but just
give me the kiddie pool for like 10 minutes, then I'll jump in the deep end. But I don't know. At least let me get my, like,
feet wet before we do laps, you know? Like, yeah.
So that said, actually during swim practice and stuff, my favorite thing to do was just jump in, because I was never going to, like, I was just going to complain if I slowly got into the water, you know?
It's true. It's true. Which, is it can also, starting a fight like this, and to your point on swimming, like sometimes jumping in is just the best solution all around for every way, shape, and form. It gets you going faster, you get acclimated faster, everything changes. It's also the most realistic. Like,
that's true.
In the case of the story, like you're not going to get your perfect point out in real life before you have to go do something or like make a change. Conversation and everything else just doesn't work that way.
Right.
So
intensity abound.
Right. And wow, it is crazy. I'm not gonna lie. When I was reading this, totally the first thing I thought of was that metaphor of like a child throwing a toy. And I was like, but originally I wrote Barbie, like throwing a Barbie over the shoulder. Because that's exactly what I imagined. Just like a 10-foot person grabbing a man and just going whoop, and like ditching the Barbie into the people, into the Koloss to become like a meat for the Koloss.
Yeah.
Becoming a meat.
I mean, it's not that dramatic. It
No,
is dramatic, but it's like me grabbing a toddler.
And then like flinging
it's
them.
like me just flinging a toddler over my shoulder.
Yeah.
Which, is a horrifying prospect, and I'd be able to do it pretty easily, but it's not that easy, Like there's some effort that would go into that.
It's fair.
Disclaimer, I do not endorse in any way throwing toddlers over shoulders. I feel like that covers me legally, right?
Yes, it does. The only way that you can do this is if you preface it with sack of potatoes and you don't let go. And you like throw them up and onto shoulder, not over shoulder. It's the key clarification.
That's what I meant.
Oh, sack of potatoes?
That's exactly what I was talking about.
Yeah. You're legally absolved, I think, of any potential wrongdoing.
Potential?
You're right.
Not even close.
All right, so as the story does, it cuts around a bunch, and we cut over to Vin stopping in a small village, meeting a group of Ska who've taken up residence in a nobleman's house. Vin is out of pewter for the pewter drag on her way there, and she comes to the realization that, she doesn't have enough and that she wouldn't be able to get enough in a reasonable amount of time. She comes up with a different solution, something closer to the spike way of before, using a rotating group of horseshoes, basically to create a mobile spikeway for herself. And this is so fucking cool.
It's super cool. It was a fun, like, just the entire process of her like trying and kind of figuring it out and getting her groove a little bit was satisfying, very satisfying to read. But as far as this section goes, I talked about it a little bit in the Discord when I was reading through this the first time. And how do you imagine her taking off initially? Like, she's talking to the Ska and she's like, she confirms that she is her and then like bounds away. But like, how do you imagine Crossland? How do you imagine her like taking flight?
So for me, when it comes to this in particular, I imagine her dropping the horseshoe and going straight up, and then actually throwing a horseshoe backwards at an angle and pushing for that to start her momentum forward, if that makes sense. So she pushes at an angle to like get herself launched, because like the tip of the horseshoe would hit the ground first, like, and then so that would be her forward momentum, and then she just kind of continued building on that as she went. That was my thought. But
I meant more body posture.
You?
But it does say that she goes up and forward.
Yes, right.
So like she initially just goes straight forward, and based on the mechanics of what we know about steel pushing, it goes straight out from her center of mass, and like it affects her that way. So I like to imagine, I don't think this is how she does it. I think she like braces herself and like gets into position and like kind of looks like she's flying or jumping or something. But I like to imagine it's like rubber banding in a video game where she's like talking and then just boop, just stays in the exact same posture and just slides forward
like
into the right.
T-posing around, basically, but not quite a T-pose, you know? Yeah. No, that's a fair point. I totally agree with you. Now that you say that, it's definitely got to be like she just goes, right? Because you can imagine, like, you can also imagine the flourish of like, her like crouching and then jumping to like take off and like doing something fancy and like spinning and getting the tassels going and
Yeah.
I don't know, getting fancy with it. But I like to think like you think, where it's just like in kitten cannon launched out at an angle, like just gone.
But then after that, she's like actively almost like
Yeah.
climbing a ladder because she's like throwing horseshoes and catching horseshoes throughout the entire thing. So like she's doggy paddling through the sky for the rest of the time
Kinda.
or swimming.
It's not a bad way of putting it. Yeah. I can't imagine anything else now. But like standing, like treading water badly.
Yeah.
With your arms. Her legs are fine. But, treading water badly is when you actually can't tread water. I'm just imagining like not doing circle arms, like doing, I don't know, fucking forward, backward for some reason.
Oh, actually, I wonder if she'd have to go backwards.
Why?
Because the horseshoes are coming at her center of mass. So for her to catch it, she has to be in front of it.
Couldn't she have it behind her back and like catch it?
Yeah, how's she gonna throw it behind her back?
like
Oh wait, she's not throwing anyway. She's
not. She's just
pushing.
dropping, right? Yeah. Yeah, she doesn't have to actually like do anything super intense.
Yeah, I suppose so.
For those of you at home, I had to stand up to imitate the way that I thought that this was going.
She could hypothetically T-pose across the entire continent if she wanted to.
Yeah, she could totally. You haven't seen Raised by Wolves. Never mind. One of the big scary robots like T-pose flies, kind of but it's more like a Y pose, I guess, kind of like a low Y, as opposed to like up high, it's down beneath. More like repulsors, like Iron Man style repulsors, but like not actually, engines. Anyway, yeah.
No,
she could totally do that.
Yeah, she could do that.
Yeah, okay.
I'd like to see that adapted.
Right. How does that?
Because, I think they'd probably go with some sort of flourish that makes it look more like pulling it towards her hand instead of towards the center of her body, because that just makes the motion easier to do,
I think that this is so grounded though in physics that they would have a tough time
They'd have to.
not following through and making it real. Like I think that would be a really big sticking point for Brandon because he wants everything to be so well grounded.
I agree.
In a lot of this. So God, I just thought about something else, Cosme related, and now I'm not going to be able to get to that on my head. I need to talk to someone about that later. Okay, fuck. Thinking about adaptations. With that, we go into chapter 53. So we start off with our logbook here. I have a young nephew, one Rashik. He hates all of Kalenium with the passion of envious youth. He hates Alendi even more acutely, though the two have never met, for Rashik feels betrayed that one of our oppressors should have been chosen as the hero of ages.
So, isn't this a stark difference in tone from the previous one? You don't have to answer that.
I mean, it is.
It feels like a different person entirely.
Okay.
But gives some more perspective on Rashik and makes me feel like he was maybe even the instigator of this plan as opposed to Quan putting him up to it. I don't know. He's poised to be kind of the foil to this whole thing from the jump. Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, no, I totally, and this is just in connection to the text itself. I was just curious about something. Yeah, I think that there is something to be said about the tonality here, and I do understand the concern. Yeah. Interesting. So like the, finger twirling, mustache twirling levels of intrigue here. Chapter 53 in general is chock full of frenetic energy and brilliant cuts between perspectives. So lots of this is I'm probably going to say cut to a lot because we move around through a lot of perspectives pretty quickly here to kind of see the impact of the battle on each of these people. But with that, we start quickly on Straff. We get like a page and a half with Straff. Straff thinks he's figured out the drug combination that he was hooked on, which is that of a leaf that had been kind of the drug that he knew is very harmful. And so he's going to have to slowly wean himself off of it. He's been chewing on the leaves to keep himself upright. We're also introduced formally to Gennaro, of whom was that general that we talked about last week that he had previously assumed would usurp his power when he knew Zane was gone.
I was really expecting there to be some sort of resolution, much like what he was expecting with Gennaro of kind of him requiring someone to take care of him and help him and like follow through with the decisions that he makes. And eventually that coming back to bite him and for the guy to just kind of off him, take the position, but kind of toy with him first and put himself into an even more advantageous position before killing Straff. But nope, he's standing. He's not fine, but he's more or less all right, you know? He's not on death's door anymore for now.
Yeah, not at all. Not at all. He's doing okay. So
I felt like that would have been a poetic way to go, you know, considering that Set is wheelchair bound to have like but is still able to effectively lead and to see Straff. It would have been poetic for Straff to go into a similar position and be completely ineffective at leading because of it. Like I feel like that would have been a cool positioning.
It would highlight the yes, I like that idea. I like that idea because it is anti, ableist in its own right. You can see that parallel happening with sort of the way that he's being debilitated, right? From the previous chapter. But that said, Straff doesn't resolve this week, so there's something left there. But I agree with you. I think it would have been a nice parallel to see between the two characters, right? Like to show Set as this. Set is such a hard character to nail at this point, right? Because he is kind of a good guy. He's kind of a bastard, but he's got good intentions. I think we'll be able to talk more about that when we get into this a little bit.
I think so too.
I agree with you, I think, on Straff. And I think this is really just to show how much of a diabolical bastard he is, especially when comparing against Jennarl, of whom seems to be a reasonable general. He's like, fine, you let the Koloss attack, you let him do the thing. Now we should go, which happens a couple of times. Yeah. So we cut from there over to the fight for Luthadel from Sazed's perspective, and I think that it's an absolutely wild shift as we get to see the Feruchemist wield his powers for the offensive, squeezing and breaking a Koloss's neck and throwing his literal weight around as he presses shut the door in the hopes of buying his men more time. Man, it is so cool to see Sazed like using all of these abilities and kind of like hulking out a little bit. Oh, you say Hulk, but it's just from Branderson, it's excellent as far as description goes inside of these moments between the bodies, the blood, the snow, and the ash mixing on all sides, the darker blood versus the more crimson, like the crimson red versus the other. It's just all good. I haven't talked enough about Brandon's descriptive language this week because there are a number of moments where he just paints scenes perfectly with the ash and snow falling and blending together. I think he even in the last chapter was like black moss on trees or something like that. Anyway.
Yeah, I appreciate that you used the term Hulk, that he hulked out, because that is very much the imagery that was evoked for me during this section. Just physically, obviously, he swells and he becomes this fighting machine, but also sort of intellectually, like I talked about before, there's a shift specifically with Sazed. This is that shift where he is so focused on being this big burly fighting dude that his intelligence seems to completely get pushed to the wayside as well. Like he seems to be acting so much more instinctively and carnally as opposed to the very careful, methodical Sazed that we've known just with muscles,
Yeah. And I think that comes from a lack of experience, like there's a lot of different things. It's like he's literally throwing himself around as best he can, and there is something very instinctive there about fighting for everyone's survival. And he's shocked that he's doing so well too. That's kind of the other thing in the end, when he throws his weight against the door and they're able to shut it with the brick and give themselves some time. And then they cut back and he steps away and has that brief conversation, then the wall's breaking again behind him, and you're like, fuck. You just wanted him to get a little bit of a break,
That's everybody in this section, though. We want Vin to get a little bit of a break. We want Sazed to. We want, Clubs to.
Clubs,
of course.
And Breeze, yeah.
Nobody gets a break.
Yeah, nobody gets a break. Speaking of
us
though,
to get a break.
I need a break. But Clubs and Breeze flee their position at Zinc Gate and pull with them as many troops as they possibly can, hoping to rally at Keep Lakal, where Lord Penrod is. The Koloss run through the street and cut them off on the front side as well as behind, Breeze tries to shout to warn Clubs and the troops of the approaching Colossus from behind, but as he turns, he sees Clubs get struck down, cleaved in half by one of the beasts, first losing his arm and then through him. And Breeze flees into the building man. And this is seriously brutal, the way that Breeze just goes from this sort of mocking, funny guy, rich guy, like not super funny. He's not like a Deadpool type humor, but he's got kind of that uppity attitude about him. And to see that just like melt here as he loses his closest friend over the course of this novel is just horrifying.
Yeah. Almost his only friend.
Pretty much.
Know?
Yeah.
So it was tough. Very tough to read that. And that's an understatement, I feel like, especially because it's so rare in the last several books that we've read that we get an actual like front to back death scene. There's oftentimes a lot left to the imagination. There's sometimes shrouded because they're not actually dead. More often than not, I don't know. It was tough to see like a straight up one of our guys no longer a person.
And in kind of an eye blink moment, like the last time that something happened this quickly was Kelsier to some degree, right?
Yeah.
Kelsier got a little bit more fanfare, but yeah, Did
we actually see him fully die though?
Yeah, we saw him on the spike dead, or on the spears dead. He for sure died. Yeah.
Yep, you're right.
Yeah. This one hurts, I don't know. And obviously we anything else on the Club's Breeze moment that you wanted to say here?
No, I think you covered it, especially with the friendship between the two of them. Makes it hurt that much more.
The only other thing that I can think of with Breeze is to watch him kind of break and crumble this week is really, really hard because he always has been a man of confidence. That's his thing. He is almost the literal con man of the whole, crew.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of crazy to see him break that way. So then we move to Doxson, who has a moment of panic as he knows that he's kind of about to die, writing down and kind of doing everything he can before he meets a similar end to that of Clubs. He doesn't quite die without fighting. At the very least, he does pick up his sword and swing it back, and the Colossus catches it in its palm, cuts it just barely, and then the haft of the other sword comes down on his head and left in black. Just that brutal cut where it's like, and then all went black. Terrifying.
Yeah. It's
like to see a
POV
cut off.
Yeah, but it still leaves it open to not actually being dead, especially when paired with later on. We get Sazed talking about how his knowledge of Doxson's death is secondhand as opposed to Clubs's. So like there are several seeds of doubt for Doxson. So I'm going to make my prediction that he's not actually dead. But
don't you feel like that would feel really cheap with everything that happens this week?
Yes.
Do you think that Brandon would do us dirty that way?
Yes. Especially the juxtaposition. Okay. Because we get a very, very clear death from Clubs. And this one is with multiple lines kind of shrouded in a little bit of uncertainty.
Okay. All right. I'll take an easy prediction. That's fine. Just kidding. I'm just giving you shit. Yeah, no, fair point. Yeah, I mean, a number of the scribes do survive there. That's kind of the note that you're talking on and pulling on from later when we get to Sazed and kind of the how's everyone doing at the end of this. Yeah, so we do know that some survived. So there's that question. But one of the scribes says that they definitely saw him cut down.
Yes.
So
that comment also, because there's no confirmation of death in any of it.
Yeah, because, I mean, Sazed has a more important thing to go find, which we'll talk about when we get there. But we cut from there, of course, inside of this moment of combat, we cut to Alrianne and Set sitting and watching the conflict from a distant western hill. I appreciate that in this very brief flash that we get from them, Set has a profound quote that I really think shows the value that he placed on the crew inside of that city after he like met and got to know them and what they had done to, try to prop up what they had at the time. Alrianne, says something about, I thought you were a good man and everything else. And he says, the good men are all dead, Alrianne. They died in that city. Yeah,
this parrots exactly what he was talking about before with Elend, about being a good man and how that doesn't necessarily make you a good leader. And he was pretty adamant from that point that he wasn't in that camp, that he would be a good leader because he's not a good man, which is it's a strange take to to hold, but makes total sense in the totality of his character, you know? So it's weirdly touching for him to say that, like, this is a strangely touching moment, I think, in my head.
Yeah, it is a very touching moment. It's kind of a thematic irony to some degree, right? That, this is sort of the good guys losing in a lot of ways, and it is literally the good guys losing because they don't even in a war that you come out with some people alive, you still lost because you lost people along the way and everything else. So even when we end this week with the perception of Finn being able to take the Colossus out of the city, it's still like not really a swashbuckling victory, like
Right.
a cheery situation that we're going to find ourselves on the other side of this. So we move back to Sazed with a towering 12-foot Koloss looming over him, intimidating as all get out. He fears the end of his life, accepts it, and focuses on the beauty of the world around him before a glint catches his eye in the red sun and a coin finds its mark in the back of a Koloss's skull. Vin has returned. She jumps down, swinging the gate around like a giant mace. She clears the courtyard in a single swing of the Koloss. Sazed quickly turns and gets the civilian out of there. I really love this scene from an action perspective, but there's also definitely something here to say about faith and kind of the lack thereof of the civilians that we discussed earlier, and lack thereof meaning on Sazed's part and sort of that conversation. Obviously, as I kind of said earlier, when your gods are physical, corporeal beings, it's a very different ball game to be playing with, because is it personal faith on the way that you think the people behave, or is it actually like a religious, you know what I mean? Like it's a little, it almost feels weird to call it like a religion, because if a person is alive and it's around a person, it feels more like a cult to me in the way that those typically are. But they're not really cultists, because it's not, a cult would imply some negative connotation from Vin's part.
Cult doesn't
You know what I mean?
imply negative, technically.
Okay.
In modern usage it does, but that's exactly the sort of distinction, is that a cult is a religion with a living deity.
And I think the other part, okay, that's a fair point. I think the other part, though, that, like, she doesn't participate in it. You know what I mean? Like, she's not, she's not really a participant in, that's the other distinction that I think makes it less cult-like,
changes things.
Yeah, that was where, like, my brain went. So you could call, like, the Lord Ruler's religion, to the point of what we were talking about before, more cult-like, and this is more of a cult around someone. Yeah.
And I don't think that's like a
I'm playing
scholarly
fast and loose with
distinction,
it.
but that's kind of the
loose.
typical distinction.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about her return being in line with exactly what these people are expecting, So I think it still points towards the prophecy in the terrorist religion. But it's tough for me to like divorce my train of thought from that sort of idea. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think we did hit on this a lot earlier, and so that makes it kind of easier to, at this point, kind of like roll off of it, because I think we talked about a lot of this, but it does. There's something that's like clawing at me here that's hard to figure out, because, and I think some of it is that distinction between like a religion, cult, and whatever maybe actually exists, like whatever maybe the actual scholarly term is for people. Yeah. I think it's something that's so poorly defined in my brain, because I don't know of any examples where someone is worshipped as reverently as a god would be, but they aren't actively partaking in it themselves, if that makes sense. Like they aren't taking advantage of it in some way. I think that's my, issue. The closest you get is like a politician.
Yeah.
But even then, they're kind of cults of personality a lot of the time. So and sort of reverence. I don't know.
Yeah. But at a certain point, Vin does participate. Like, she fought against it, but she's starting to lean in a little bit.
That's fair. She's not completely absolved of anything. It's a fair point. She's not really there's no taking advantage of it. She's not, using it for any sort of malintent either. But she does kind of lean in a little bit into using it to, at the very least, assuage fears. I don't know. It's tough. It's tough to parse exactly what's being swung for here philosophically. But
I agree.
So moving on from that, we kind of end this. Did you have any thoughts on the combat though with her, Vin? I know we moved into the philosophy. Did you want to talk about the?
She doesn't get into the actual like control of the Koloss here, does she? Yet?
No.
She's
It's next chapter. Yeah, she's just swinging around fighting.
Yeah, she's fucking wild, man.
wrecking ball.
There's more fights to come, so we'll get into that because I want to talk a little bit about the control aspect, but I think I'll still touch on the actual physical combat part.
I really appreciated seeing Vin fight from Sazed's perspective, from someone else's perspective again.
Mm-hmm.
I think the last time did this even happen when they were in the castle? I don't think so, because that was all Vin's perspective, right?
That was all Vin's perspective.
Yeah. So this is kind of, for the first time in a while, this is the first time we've had an outside perspective watching a Mistborn really kind of go at it, and especially outside from Vin. I mean, we've seen Kelsier. That was my first thought.
Okay.
And that's why I said Mistborn. I cannot fully parse if I remember. I don't think anyone else did, but yeah.
I guess we get Waylon or whatever his name is.
Oh yeah,
the roof.
Yeah, Waylon. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, we do kind of get some of that from him. So that's a fair point. Yeah,
he survived, right?
Yeah, no, I think he lived because he was hidden under the pile of bodies.
New protagonist.
I mean, could be. Holds a secret vendetta. Assassin. Gonna get Vin or Elend.
No.
Glad you dived out of that because I was not ready to maintain that prediction on the bottom of the chart and like try to even facilitate the idea.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So with that, to end the chapter, we move back to Breeze, who sat in that dilapidated building, fearing for his life, and accidentally and coincidentally soothing everyone outside, probably in an attempt to make himself feel better, because he was trying to just like figure out, this gets so complicated with his emotions. And maybe it's also that the soldiers may have just had a perspective of him doing that from inside of the building. Like there's so many questions that surround this moment. And this one hurts in a lot of different ways. We find Ham, of course, still be alive and well, and our fragmented crew makes their way stumbling through the streets over to Keep Hasting.
Yeah, obviously great to see Ham up and about. We get some confirmation there, which is nice. But I absolutely adore the fact that Breeze's subconscious goes straight to soothing others. I think it creates this incredible depth of character for him and really proves that a lot of his gruff, and I don't think gruff is right, but sort of
you even
uppity,
just say his exterior. Yeah,
that's
why I was saying
his exterior
uppity,
in general is entirely a facade. Like he is a very caring person to his core. Really, really cool.
And I think that's something that was nicely highlighted earlier. So I realized that I just said that it's ambiguous. I actually don't think it's ambiguous. I think that it did happen per exactly what you're saying, because he said that he had a hard time turning it off earlier in the first time we were in his perspective. And so that's part of the reason that Clubs was such a good friend to him, is because he knew that he wasn't subconsciously soothing. And I think to your point, it definitely speaks to a level of character with him that is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And loving and caring regardless of humanity in general. And you can see why Kelsier would latch into him as a good member of the crew at the time.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, cool.
Almost worth losing Clubs over it. Like, I think that
from the original crew. Yep.
Yeah, Kelsier would have chosen Breeze over Clubs.
Mm-hmm.
Wanted Clubs in it, obviously, but
could not replace.
Was willing to take the bet to let Clubs walk.
Yeah,
over having Breeze in the crew.
Yeah, great point. Okay, with that, we move into our last chapter of the week, chapter 54. Our logbook here at the very top says, Alendi will need guides through the Terrace Mountains. I've charged Rashik with making certain that he and his trusted friends are chosen as those guides.
I don't know what to make of this, because I'm starting to this makes me almost doubt, or it doesn't make me doubt my previous thoughts about it being two different people in two different logbooks, but I could see potentially Quan, knowing that Alendi was kind of in disagreement with Quan and kind of squabbling a little bit, and they were kind of at odds, for him to be publicly decrying the people that he was choosing as his guides, almost in a sense of reverse psychology, trying to ensure that Alendi actually picks it because he thinks it's what Quan doesn't want. I could see that being something, and this is just that passage is just kind of cherry picked out of a quote section of a logbook.
Yeah, kind of cherry picked out of the diary
to make the context match, or to lose the entire context. What's going on? I could see that. I could make Pepe Sylvia lines to something like that. But I don't know if it fully supports everything.
Totally. And I think that that's kind of the fun of this logbook is that it is so motherfucking ambiguous that you're just waiting to get punched in the face with something, you know? Like, where are we going with this? We're 54 chapters in. We have 4 fucking chapters left. 4 logbooks left. You're telling me it's all going to make sense in the end? Motherfucker.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. Vin fights the Koloss, dispatching them one at a time with ease, but in the same stroke, she's getting tired. She knows that she can't beat this army on her own despite her best efforts and is kind of slowly running out of the different metals, right, over the course of time. So,
I hadn't realized that this was like so close to the end of the previous chapter. I would have gone into it a little bit more.
Yeah, well, it's A-okay. I mean, it's reasonable.
All good.
This entire week, like these last 2 chapters blend together really easily because they're all pretty similar.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I think for me, what this proves more and more every time is how incredible Vin is on like a power scale, if you want to put it that way. Like she was able to go up against 300 soldiers, many of which were like a large number of haze killers all at once.
Yeah.
Without atium, and just blaze through them with Zane, and is now intensely suffering from like the effects of pewter dragging, and she's running out of metals, and she is just fucking exhausted, and she's still able to just throw these Koloss around like ragdolls, more or less. It's really something else. It's really, really insane.
It is, like you said, power scale. I think it's interesting because I know that you don't mean this intentionally, right? And we've talked about this a couple of times. But the foundational separation between power and talent with Allomancy, right? Yeah. But that she is just so fucking good at this that there is just something on a completely different level here that, I don't know. Yeah. To your point, like, yeah. It's hard to even quantify.
The term power, like I said, it's conversational.
No, I know. Yeah,
it's not technical.
Yep, totally. And I'm not picking at that at all. I just, clarifying. I really think that, her throwing around a Koloss like this is insane. I think it's great. Yeah, man. I don't know.
Yeah, man.
I mean, really like, I know that we didn't talk about it then, but I really like the way that Sazed describes pulling of the door off the hinges, and the way that like she has to have a massive counterweight on the other side. And so she is just like pulling herself between 2 incredible objects. And he's like kind of in that moment worried for her in the way that she might get like yanked one direction or another whenever either of them gives.
She might pancake herself.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, he's super terrified of that. Right. It's like, but he also is confident enough in her skill when he sees it that it's like, whoa, like that's a crazy jump. Yeah. Again, major kudos and credit to Brandon Sanderson for being able to write actions so incredibly well with such a technical grace.
Yeah, it's technical grace is perfect. It's because you could very easily just slip into hand wavy technicalities of things that she's accomplishing without actually like giving us the rundown of everything and just kind of saying, this makes sense. Just she does this. Like, I feel like that would be probably incredibly tempting to do when writing scenes like this, just to get through it and get through all of the information that needs to get conveyed. But instead, he makes very meticulous work of ensuring that every single line is consistent with the physics set up in this entirely fictional world. And it's admirable and impressive, frankly amazing.
For sure. I don't want to pretend to know Brandon's process at all. But I want to imagine that like any other writer, he's human. And so part of that process would be you get to a difficult scene to write and you maybe don't know how to describe it. And you go, Vin pulls the door off the hinges and swings it at all of the Koloss. And then you move on to the next paragraph. And then later in the edit, you're like, I know that I need to describe that better when everything is fleshed out perfectly. And that's why drafting is so important. Don't get me wrong. I have to imagine. I love the man. He's incredibly talented. But if he could write this on a first pass, I'd be so fucking angry. You know what I mean? Like, Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. It's just because it's so good. It's so well done, and it's like Hemingway level stripped down a lot of the time in these action scenes, and it works brilliantly that way. I wish he'd, and this is just a general criticism, I wish he'd get a little bit more prosy and flourishy in Mistborn with some of the other moments, but because he's so good at like stripping it down when it needs to be, it's perfect. It's like a good kit car, if that makes sense. That doesn't make any sense. I'm cutting that. Good kit cars are still shit. Fuck. Okay, so a mostly naked Sazed, though, confronts Lord Penrod with all the gathered soldiers that remain, as well as Breeze and Ham. They're kind of seeking the safety in the walls of the keep, and the cowardly Penrod is denying them that access. Coward might be too strong. Let me just say, I think that Penrod is doing his best, but he never he says something very eloquent about like taking the crown from Elend, and how, in fact, taking the crown, he totally saved his life, which is cowardly in its own right from his perspective, but it's also kind of inadvertent. This sounds like a man reading his own last rites to some degree. Like, this guy is not, he's convinced that he is dead.
I think at the same time, he's also convinced that, like, he's made the decision that if the crown survives and if the government itself survives, then they've won. As opposed to trying to save the populace in the actual city that they're governing.
That's a good point.
So I think that highlights another difference between him and Elend and a lot of the assemblymen in Elend in what they're actually motivated by, whether or not it's the title or the people.
Yeah. It's a great point. Because Elend would strive entirely different. He would have put everything into defending the whole walls. And then when falling back, like Sazed and like everyone else in the crew in this moment, then it's about preserving the most life in everyone that they can. I guess it's they have more of a consistent ideology throughout versus Penrod is save those that I think that I can save, including preserving the power structure. Yeah. Naked Sazed, though, in the freezing cold and snow and everything else, will forever sit with me in my brain. And this is, I understand why you would do something like this. Again, these books tread that YA to adult line. And it's moments where like the blood and violence comes in where it's like, this is not YA for sure. This is like incredible. And even Brandon's writing isn't YA. So YA is just a stupid moniker. I've already been through this a couple of different times. I think it's dumb. But Sazed being in a loincloth is the one thing that I find semi-unrealistic, because I think that the dude's a eunuch. It's not like his, like there's that whole thing, which, yeah. And like Hulk, does he have a stretchy loincloth?
Yeah. Or did, I got it as like he found a curtain or something and like,
oh, okay. Yeah.
Made himself a loincloth for the sake of being, what would it be? Not humility, but modesty.
Modesty. Yeah. Modesty.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's kind of how I read that.
That matches his character.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I can agree with that for sure.
But like you mentioned, same Hulk vibes.
Yeah, it's like, and at the very, like the one plus that I can give Hulk at the very least is like he's a scientist. He probably designed some really fucking stretchy pants. Like,
I don't think he did, because
I think in the comic books he did, but that's a
but they were always ripped at the bottom. He didn't make like
he could only afford
he could only afford the top part.
There's my dumb rationale for you. And also I think that this was something that was adjusted for in like the 90s or 2000s, not when Hulk originally launched as a character, of course, because obviously I'm sure it was one of the first things people thought about is like, dude goes through a lot of pants.
Yeah. I mean, it's at least for me at this point, it's a part of the character because it doesn't work.
Yes.
And like you kind of have to keep doing it because
it's kind of, it's
that's
a meme.
What you expect.
Right. It's literally a meme, and meme in the original sense, not the fucking jokey sense that we have now. I love and appreciate both, and I understand why memes become like the word for joke, but it is a culturally repetitive thing that people understand is what a meme is.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. You might call it a trope if you're talking about media. Anyway. Cool. All right. So we move back to Vin, and she's constantly thinking about where the well is, where the well could be. And I just want to ask, PJ, where do you think the well is? We'll give you a little prediction here. Predicty poo.
I think it's at Creedic Shaw.
Okay.
And I think it always had been, or at least it was the reason why the Lord Ruler set up shop where he did. Whether or not it like moves or something after being taken and like moves to somewhere else and then he seeked it out, or if that's where it was initially to begin with. I don't know. I don't know what Luthadel looked like pre-millennia, like if it was a big city or if it was nothing and he built the city around himself. There's a lot of questions there to sort of make an informed decision, but I think the heart of Creedic Shaw is where the Well of Ascension is.
Are you suggesting that the pooping room is...
It's the pooping room.
I'm just on the verge of having like a laughing fit. You know, back when you called it the pooping room the first time, I was like, I know where this is eventually headed. Like, I know where we're gonna be in like 2 books. And it's gonna be a meme. All right.
The pooping room.
Yeah, sometimes PJ, you accidentally strike gold, and sometimes it is also in relation to a toilet, or toilet derived humor. So,
yeah.
All right.
Well, it's what I do best.
Excellent. So Vin continues to cause havoc among the Koloss, killing them and dispatching them, and then she finally runs out of iron, steel, and pewter, completely drained. It's great to see kind of her exhaustion set in as she loses these things as well, and she starts to feel slow and she doesn't have the pewter and everything else. But she's got one idea left. She slams into the mind of the Koloss with a duralumin-enhanced soothing and latches on to the consciousness of the Koloss in the area, able to control them like she did 10 soon before. The Lord Ruler had built a weakness into these creatures too, just like the other 2 that he had created. What'd you make of this?
So I was confused by it, and I'm curious what you think of this. If I'm just misreading it and it's actually clear, or if it is confusing and I'm onto something. But I couldn't exactly grasp if she was controlling a single Koloss and the others were following it because it was like the biggest one or it was like the one in charge or whatever. Or if she's able to control several at once from a single duralumin push. I think what trips me up is the fact that Koloss is the plural of Koloss.
That's fair. That's fair.
So it's really difficult to read what's happening because I know like they're all sort of following her, but I don't know if she's controlling more than a single one. I don't know.
So I think to kind of generally answer your question without like directly getting into things that haven't been perfectly revealed yet, I would just say that soothing can affect multiple people, right? You can soothe in an aura, right? So I don't think that it is any different than soothing in an aura.
That makes total sense.
I'll tell you that you'll get a more specific answer eventually, but like that's basically the answer anyway, of which you can apply the logic down pretty easily. So
yeah, I hadn't. Don't know why I hadn't made.
No,
that
I mean
a
it's reasonable. It's a reasonable question though. I think because also to your point, like Koloss versus Koloss is also a thing. Yeah, what do you call a bunch of Koloss? The Koloss, the horde
Same
of
with Khandra
Koloss.
though.
Yeah, Khandras. You could say Khandras. That's reasonable.
He refers to them as the Khandra.
I think that's because it's like but they could be Khandras.
Or not even the Khandra. He just calls like
we Khandra.
or Sur or Tensoon just called Khandra.
That'd be like Minnesotan, right?
No, that has an S. Look at all those Minnesotans.
We are Minnesotan. We are Khandra. That's kind of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair.
I agree with you on the other front. I'm just saying I think that you can refer to a culture as like a singular a lot of the time. Doesn't need to be plural, but generally it can be pluralized, which is what I was saying. It could be Khandras. If you're referring to a couple of Khandra, maybe, it does work both ways again, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. But then there's horse. Like, we are horse.
Horse. We are, well, that's where equestrian, we are. Yeah.
But I mean, that'd be like Khandran. If you want to like extrapolate it that way.
Yes, there are cases that work like this, and I'm trying to remember them while we're sitting here, and I cannot. For some, like, I know that there's something else that works like this, that like has
Goose
that same kind of. Great point. Goose and goose. That's not true. But there is something that has the same context, and I'm trying to remember what it is.
Specifically, Moose and Moose was like the
Yes.
actual point.
Yes, Moose and Moose actually does work, yeah. Goose and Geese does not, but yes. Yeah. No, it's PJ, it's not Moose and Moose, it's Moose and Squirrel every time. Damn Moose and Squirrel. Did you watch Rocky and Bullwinkle growing up?
A little bit.
I watched a fuck ton of Rocky and Bullwinkle growing up. I've seen like every episode 40 or 50 times. Like I know some of those front to back. Anyway, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, God, so good. All right. We cut to Sazed's perspective and see the Colossus approaching before our girl Vin walks out among them and in front of them. She shifts gears and changes the plan. She seems to think that she can hop around the city and take control of these Colossus one group at a time without further bloodshed where it can be avoided. Penrod acquiesces to her demands because are you going to say no to a fucking Mistborn? And she leaves clearly with the intent to take down Straff Venture.
Yeah.
In the long run.
She talks about going to more Colossus, getting them under control, or under her control, essentially. And that brings up more mechanical questions from me, because at first I was under the impression that it spent all of the duralumin whenever used once, and then that was corrected, and she said you could use it a couple times. How many times? And does she have a stockpile of it at this point at her disposal, or does she have a very, very limited amount of like influencing that she can actually do at this point?
That is a great question to be answered, I think. For the most part, I would say in a simple context, the reason that she wants to go to Keep Venture, which is the first place that she's planning on going, is because of all of the reserve metals. Things like that, because she is aware that she will run out of things. That said, when she burns duralumin and then burns, is it zinc for soothing? Zinc. Brass for soothing. So when she burns brass to soothe with the duralumin, that would expend all of it.
Right.
Which at the very least gives you a hint as to how things work. So,
yep. So she's got to replenish regardless.
Yeah. Yep. But she's still in control right now while she's technically out of metals.
True. Good point. Interesting.
Your interesting there was just perfect.
Yeah.
that was it was great.
I don't think it really goes into it because it was so short-lived, but I wonder how long her control over Tensoon was during that fight with Zane.
I'll tell you, going back, you'll be like, you might key into something.
Okay.
I definitely did this pass around. I was like, okay, knowing the rules now, I get it. And I got it at the time, but it was like, there's a thing there. I'll say that. Yeah. Anything else? Any other thoughts on the planned path here from Vin going into next week? Going into our final episode.
Get him. Get him. Sick him.
Go fucking get him. Yeah, no, I agree with that. So our final note of the week is a really sad one to close out on, that of Sazed finding the corpse of Tindwyl. A field of bodies protecting her in between gates running around. He finds her. It cracks in the cold as he rolls her over. Her eyes are iced open by the cold as well. He turns off his brass mind to feel that frigid air wash over him in this moment of deep, profound sadness for our boy Sazed. His religions that he finds comfort in times like these, or offers them up into comfort, other people in comfort in times like these, has even given out as comforts to others, like they offer him nothing. He's left feeling hollow, broken, and alone. It's a quote here, and this is just an unbeatable quote. I think I said earlier that whatever the quote earlier was my favorite. This is the hardest hitting quote, maybe in the book, just because of how low it sinks our character. He was a creature who knew 300 religions, yet had faith in none of them. So when his tears fell and nearly began to freeze to his face, they gave him little comfort as his religion. They gave him as little comfort as his religions. He moaned, leaning over the frozen corpse. My life, he thought, has been a sham.
There's some weight there. Like this is a heavy end to this section. And an incredible amount of emotion. I loved personally his decision to turn off his brass mind. I think explicitly he says he does not want to feel warm in this moment. It's heartbreaking. It's so heartbreaking, man. Like I feel like I say that every time we get a sort of sad, heavy moment, but this one truly hurt me to read.
Yeah, because Sazed's always the hopeful guy, right? He always has been. He's been the source of hope in a lot of times of darkness for a lot of different people. That's kind of his whole thing, is he's the unrelenting personality of positivity. That's why Tindwyl loved him. And this is heartbreaking, immensely so.
Really is.
Yeah. Like you said, we've been seeing the slow erosion of his faith, even in his faiths. And this is the nail in the coffin in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Anything else on that one?
I don't know, man.
The description of Tindwyl kills me. Like, that is...
It's really, really unsettling. And this opens up more depth of the relationship that he and Tindwyl had. We knew it was romantic of nature, but also close. But this is something entirely different.
Yeah, and this just adds that layer. And I think what's so wonderful, and we can kind of talk a little bit about this now that the relationship is over, of course. Well, I mean, it's not over because, post-death you can still yearn, I guess. That's a problem. But the relationship as it was in life was one that was profoundly important to Sazed because he felt like he was less than a man, and she showed him a ton of love despite that and everything else. And she was like, that has no bearing on how I care about you. And like, that's just such a touching sentiment, no matter which way you look at it, that like, you are loved despite what you can't offer and what she doesn't. Like, that wasn't what love was about for them. Like, it was a deeply and true and profound personal love. And she was so much fun, like in kind of like a, if you think about earlier in the story, like she was fun for Elend, and like we had our send off last week with Elend, and it ends on that like poor note between them. And so there's this sort of like, I'm just left with this bitter taste knowing, I didn't get to talk about this last week, so I'm talking about it now. But the fact that we left last week and we left on such a sour note, and my issue here to some degree is that Tindwyl was right that it was a bad call to leave. Sazed's decision to send them away was wrong. Vin may have died inadvertently because of the force that she would have expended, but and given like Elend is safe right now, but like at what cost? Especially since we know the Well of Ascension to be here, and we know that Vin could have done something about the Koloss. Like, it just sucks. It just sucks. Tindwyl didn't have to die if Sazed wouldn't have schemed. You also can't put that completely on him because the crew agreed.
Because of the what?
The crew agreed.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
What a downer to leave this section on, man.
I know. I think, I can't remember if I mentioned it on air or not, but I seriously debated at the last minute adding chapter 55 because it is a very short chapter. Audiobook, it's 18 minutes without doing any speed up. Pages, I think it's like 7 pages or something like that. But I wanted to end here because I think that the emotionality of this section is a great note to go out on, talking about like the horrors of this war and this conflict and this battle that has been, up until this point, war of attrition, and now we've felt profound loss on the side of 2 3/4 of a character, I guess. Yeah, 3/4 is Dachshund because you don't think it's dead. Just kidding. But yeah, man, it is definitely a downer note to end on, and I simultaneously apologize for it, and I do not.
No, it's a great place to end, but
yeah,
woof.
So with that, we move into the final little bit of the book that we're going to talk about this week, which is that final logbook going into the last chapter here of this part, right? So the logbook says, Rashek is to try and lead Alendi in the wrong direction to discourage him or otherwise foil his quest. Alendi doesn't know that he's been deceived, that we've all been deceived, and he will not listen to me now.
So that would put, if we're making a direct analogy between Alendi and Vin, Sazed is Quan.
I think we were saying last week that Spook was more or less.
Or Spook. Yeah, Spook. Because Spook knows. Yeah.
I don't think we have a Rashek stand-in, really.
I don't think
Yeah.
But like this is kind of alluding to the idea.
It's at the very least alluding to, there could be a Rashek stand-in that we are unaware of, but it is also definitely alluding to the idea that while Sazed hasn't been the announcer, he kind of hasn't denied being the announcer either. And at the same time, Vin thinks that she's the hero, and she shouldn't think she's the hero, according to Quan, if you're looking at parallels.
Yeah. Yeah. But then the next book is called The Hero of Ages. So, maybe it's Spook.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a fascinating.
Yeah, it is. This is another reason that I chose to end here as opposed to next week, because next week's logbook is actually, we wouldn't have read it because it would have been the even part ending, and you would have not read that. Anyway, I forgot about some of those rules when I was originally breaking up the book. Anyway, point being, It's a great cliffhanger to end on because the logbook seems to be incredibly important now.
Yeah, but sometimes it
been the whole
doesn't,
time.
sometimes it doesn't, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I cannot wait to talk about it next week. This, of course, is the penultimate episode. Next week is going to be our finale for this. And
So,
I'm
should we talk
so
about that a little bit? Are we planning on covering the entire book next week, or are we planning on covering primarily the final section and then covering the final, or like the entire book as a wrap up?
Before we get there, let me pay off your predictions real quick, and then we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that in just a moment here. I just wanted to wrap up the idea of the logbook. So moving in, we'll go to PJ's predictions. We've got one to pay off this week, which is weird because it's one that you made a statement about and wasn't really a question. So you can go ahead and read it, and then we'll determine.
Jostes moved ahead of his army to position his army of Koloss so that he could be named king via threat of annihilation by the Koloss and their impending predicament. That feels way more wordy than I think what I was intending, but essentially the idea was Jostes. This was entirely a vie for being named king because, I don't know, he has the most important army there.
Yeah. And I think the reason that I decided to pay this off this week, more or less, is because we finally get the end of like Jostes' arc here. So it's not necessarily that like we kind of had this answer a couple of weeks ago, kinda, but we didn't know the end game yet. Now we know the end game and how that resolves. I'm going to drink for this one because ultimately this was what he was seeking, but it's not exactly how he ended. But I think you had the right idea. You're like, our threshold for these are generally, if you're over 60% correct, I take the drink, if that makes sense. PJ took a drink. So here I am trying to explain.
I figured we could split it.
That's fair. I intended to just take that one myself, but cool. That is the only prediction for this week. We've got a lot left. There's like a full page, almost 2 pages worth of predictions left, and there's 1 or 2 from the first book that are still unresolved that are sitting on this page, which is fun to me at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So we got
it's super fun for me.
We got some questions to resolve. So per the previous explanations, we are not doing questions of the week until Hero of Ages because we are recording all these 3 episodes in 1 week here because we're going on vacation. So apologies, no question of the week. But we will get back to that once we get into Hero of Ages. So, with that, next week, let's talk about what we're reading and what we're going to talk about. We're going to read chapter 57 through the end. Our target with a final episode like this is generally to just talk about the section, as much as possible to focus on the text of the section. Sometimes reveals that'll happen in there, of course, that might impact the entire book and such.
There are very clearly going to be things that all get tied together, so it's going to be impossible to strictly keep to it. But
yes, right. It will inevitably be impossible to avoid parts of the conversation that we would, in other novels, we might try to hold for a final episode. You know what I mean? Like, but this is all of this is so closely tied together for a very tight payoff. You know, all of Brandon Sanderson's novels are. So I think our target for this last episode, reading wise, is to mostly talk about that text. Of course, we're going to have to talk about other things. And then for our final episode, of which will be airing the week following, we are going to be talking with the Foxy Reader on Instagram about this book on the whole. And she's doing her first read through at the same time. So I think technically she started the Hero of Ages now, but that's because doing weekly reads and whatnot. So she will have just started it, but we'll keep that out of the conversation, of course. So yeah, she's going to be mostly exactly where you are in terms of perspective. So
yeah,
really exciting.
That's going to be exciting.
Yeah. So makes for a fun little trip. All right. Cool. So that's where we'll leave you for this week.
Thank you, as always, to Tim and Andrew for helping us keep our show's lights on. And check out all our links in the show notes where you can find our schedule, our Patreon, previous episodes, website, all of our social medias, all in one very convenient location. I think there's a new link in there, huh?
There will be at least one new link this week. We have officially launched our merch, starting with TeePublic here. To start with, we're doing a couple of other experiments and looking at some local companies because we'd rather support local. But we're starting with TeePublic. They make great stuff. Bought plenty of stuff from TeePublic, and I like what they do. So feel free to check us out over there. It will be in our show notes. I also want to just reiterate that we released an episode this past week in our short pour feed, of which is a different feed, in case you didn't know, of the show. All you have to do is search Words and Whiskey Short Pours, and you can find it. That is a monthly show that we're doing, of course. There's a link, again, in our wordsandwhiskey.show/links on our website, and as well as in our show notes, that you can go and check these things out to have easy access to, in which we announced that HowlerPod has joined our network. In addition to teasing a new show with, it's super cool to say with, or super weird to call it with, because it's a new show titled Catacomb Party, The Tales of Kana. So, of which we have now announced that will be, fingers crossed, coming out May 25th.
It's exciting. It's so exciting.
It's super exciting. We've been working on this.
It's such a fun project.
Literally since November. Yeah.
Yeah.
It has been an insane amount of time, but it has been rewarding as hell, and we're all very excited. Cool. So with that, as PJ said, you can always check us out on social media, Words Whiskey Pod on Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, wordsandwhiskeyshow@gmail.com, patreon.com/wordsandwhiskey, and tpublic.com/Atomic Pylon Media. Other than that, anything else that you can think of? I don't know. Pre-vacation week.
I'm super pumped to read the final section of this book.
Yeah.
So I will be doing that probably tomorrow night after I'm done with it.
That was my thought too. I was like, in any other world where you didn't have a final tomorrow, I'd expect you to leave and read this right away. But final is what final does. So
exactly.